Vivid verses.
The first time Marissa rolled her eyes at me in front of other people, I cataloged it the way I catalog everything. Filed it, dated it, didn't react. We were at Tom and Kara's place, 8 of us crowded around a fire pit, and I'd mentioned that I was thinking about turning down a referral bonus at work because the timing was bad for the client. Simple thing. Reasonable thing. Marissa had looked at Kara's new friend Briar. Long earrings, opinions about everything, and rolled her eyes like I'd said something pathetic. He does this, Marissa said. Leaves money on the table because he's worried about feelings. Briar laughed. Not unkindly, but with the specific texture of someone enjoying a joke at another person's expense. Some of us were raised to take what's ours, she said. I didn't say anything. I sipped my beer and watched the fire and ran the numbers in my head, except the numbers weren't about money. They were about patterns. One data point isn't a trend. I told myself that, and I believed it because I'd known Marissa for years, and this wasn't her. This was new. This was borrowed. We built something that worked. Not the kind of relationship people perform for an audience. No elaborate proposals filmed for strangers. No manufactured drama for sympathy. Just 2 people who'd figured out how to be calm around each other. She used to say, I made her feel like she could put the weapons down. That was her phrase, not mine. Put the weapons down. She'd had relationships before me where she'd had to negotiate for peace. And with me, she said she didn't have to negotiate for anything. She could just exist. I think that ease is what got reframed. Briar and her crowd. There are 3 or 4 of them rotating through Kara's orbit. Had a vocabulary I started to recognize the way you recognize a virus once you know its shape. They talked about softness as a trauma response. They talked about reclaiming your power, like power was a coat you'd left at a party and needed to go back for. They talked specifically about men who didn't fight, men who didn't perform anger, as if calm were always a mask for something rotten underneath. I'm not a man who fights. I never have been. Not because I lack the capacity for conflict, but because I've found across every domain of my life that the person who reacts first usually loses something: position, leverage, clarity. I watch. I assess. I decide. Then I act, once decisively, and I don't revisit the decision. That's not a personality quirk. That's a discipline I built on purpose, the way you'd build a body in a gym, rep by rep, until it became load-bearing. Marissa used to find that steadying. Now, apparently, she found it suspicious. 2 weeks after the fire pit, she did it again, except this time there was an audience that mattered more. Her sister Odette, who I liked, who was visiting from out of town, sitting at our kitchen table while I made dinner. You don't have to ask him, Marissa said when Odette asked whether we were doing anything for our anniversary. I don't ask permission anymore. That's the old me. Odette looked confused, the way you look confused when someone answers a question you didn't ask. I kept chopping an onion. I did not look up. Internally, though, I was running a different calculation than the one at the fire pit. This wasn't a guest dynamic anymore. This was inside the house. This was in front of family. The location of the behavior mattered. It told me whether this was performance for an audience or something she actually believed now, something migrating from her friend group into her bones. I didn't ask if you asked permission, Odette said carefully. I asked if you guys had plans. Same thing, Marissa said. He'll do what I tell him anyway. That's how it works now. She laughed when she said it, light, like a joke, but jokes are dated too. People tell you what they're rehearsing before they fully commit to the performance. I set the knife down. I wiped my hands on the towel hanging from the oven door, unhurried, and I looked at her. Not coldly, not with any heat in it either, just direct. We don't have plans yet, I said to Odette. We'll figure something out. Then, to Marissa, evenly, can I talk to you in the other room for a second? She rolled her eyes. There was again the same eyes, the same theater, but she came. I closed the kitchen door most of the way, leaving it open enough that this wasn't a secret, just private. "What was that?" I said. Not a question. A request for information. What was what? I was joking. You weren't joking. You were testing a line in front of your sister to see how it played. I kept my voice level, the way I'd keep it discussing a quarterly report. I don't know what you and Briar talk about when I'm not around, and honestly, I don't care what you talk about. But what just happened in there? Telling my family I'll do what I'm told. That's not us. That's never been us. I need you to hear that clearly. That's not a bit I'm going to play along with even once. She crossed her arms. It's not a big deal. You're being weirdly intense about a joke. I'm not intense. I'm specific. I held her gaze steady, no edge in it. This is the only time I'm going to say this, so I want you to actually absorb it instead of waiting for me to get mad, because I'm not going to get mad. I love you. I built a life with you on purpose, not by accident, and I like that life. But I'm not going to be reframed by you or anyone in your new circle as some project that needs fixing. If this is a one-time thing, a phase, a phrase you picked up and tried on, fine. We move on, no scar tissue. But if this becomes a pattern, if you keep doing this, testing me in front of people to see whether I'll perform some reaction for you, I will not fight you about it. I'll just leave, calmly, completely, and I won't be coming back to argue the point a second time. I watched her face while I said it. There's a particular kind of disbelief that doesn't look like surprise. It looks like amusement, like she caught me overreacting, which told me everything about how this would go. You're being dramatic, she said. I'm being precise, I said. There's a difference. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you the truth in advance, which is the kindest thing I know how to do. I'd rather you have the information now than be confused later about why something ended. She didn't say anything for a second. Then, fine. Got it. Drama king. I let that land without responding to it, because responding to the bait would have undone the entire point of staying calm. I opened the kitchen door, went back to chopping onions, and made dinner like nothing had happened, because as far as I was concerned for that night, nothing had. But I want to be honest about what I was doing internally, because that's the part nobody sees. I wasn't performing serenity. I was building a record. Somewhere in the back half of my mind, a ledger had opened, not out of vindictiveness, but out of self-respect. I have always operated this way. I extend trust generously. I extend patience further than most people would consider reasonable, but I do not extend it infinitely, and I track the data so that when the moment comes to decide, I'm deciding on evidence, not emotion. That night was entry number 1 in a column I hoped would stay empty. It didn't stay empty. The second incident came faster than I expected. 17 days later, which I noted because 17 days is not a long runway for someone to forget an explicit warning. We were at a dinner party hosted by one of Briar's friends, someone named Tash who I'd met exactly once. 8 or 9 people around a long table, the kind of evening where everyone's had 2 glasses of wine and the conversation drifts toward relationships because someone always steers it there. Tasha's partner, a quiet guy named Foster, made some offhand comment about deferring to Tash on vacation planning because she was better at logistics. Reasonable. Functional division of labor. But Briar pounced on it like he'd confessed to something shameful. "See, this is what I mean," Briar said, gesturing at Foster with her wine glass. "Men think deferring is some kind of gift they're giving you. It's not a gift. It's avoidance. They don't want the responsibility, so they dress up checking out as respect." A couple of heads nodded. I said nothing because it wasn't my fight, and Foster seemed like a grown adult capable of speaking for himself, which he did, mildly, defending his own position. But then Marissa turned to me. "He's the same way," she said, to the table, not to me. "Won't make a real decision unless I push him into it." I felt the room's attention shift toward me the way a current shifts when something heavy drops into water. I did the math instantly, The kind of fast, silent math I do without anyone seeing the gears turn. This was not the same as the kitchen incident. That had been private, contained, correctable with a quiet conversation. This was the second instance, the exact behavior I had explicitly named and explicitly warned her about, now performed in front of strangers who had no context for our actual life, where I do, in fact, make decisions decisively, often unilaterally, sometimes to her gratitude and occasionally to her mild irritation, but never with hesitation. I had two options on the table, and I considered both in the 2 or 3 seconds before I had to respond, because in a room like that, silence has its own meaning and you don't get long to choose yours. Option 1. Deflect with humor, smooth it over, protect the room's comfort at the expense of letting the lie stand uncorrected. That's the easy path, the path most people take, because conflict in public is expensive and humiliating. But that path also confirms her story to the room and, worse, confirms to her that the warning I'd given 17 days earlier was negotiable, that I'd absorb the mischaracterization rather than correct it, the way a man without real boundaries would. Option 2. Correct the record calmly, without aggression, in a way that didn't turn the dinner into a spectacle, but also didn't let the false claim breathe unchallenged. I chose option 2 because I always choose option 2. Half measures are how people end up trapped in narratives other people write for them. That's not accurate, I said. Mild voice. Not loud. I didn't even put my fork down. I make decisions all the time. I made the call on our last move without consulting anyone, including her, and it worked out fine. I think what's happening is some people here have decided that a man who doesn't need to perform conflict to prove he's engaged must not be engaged. Those are different things. There was a beat of silence. Tasha's partner, Foster, actually laughed, a short, surprised laugh, like someone had said the thing he'd been too polite to say. Briar's mouth tightened slightly. Marissa's face did something complicated. Embarrassment, maybe, or the specific anger of someone who'd expected backup and gotten correction instead. The conversation moved on, the way conversations do when someone refuses to escalate, but also refuses to fold. I didn't bring it up again at the table. I didn't sulk. I asked Tash a question about the wine, genuinely curious, and the dinner continued. But in the car afterward, I didn't let it go unaddressed, because letting it go unaddressed twice would have made the first warning theater, words without follow-through, which is worse than no warning at all. Worse, because it teaches the other person that your boundaries are decorative. That's 2, I said, once we were both buckled in, before she'd even started the engine. 2 what? I told you exactly what this looked like 17 days ago. I told you I wasn't going to participate in being recast as some passive man who needs to be managed. Tonight, in front of people I've met once, you did the exact thing I named. I kept my eyes forward, my voice unhurried. I'm not angry. I want to be clear about that, because I think you're waiting for me to get loud so you can categorize this as me overreacting. I'm not going to give you that, but I need you to understand that I'm not bluffing, and I'm not going to keep having this same conversation indefinitely. There's a difference between a misunderstanding and a pattern, and we're now solidly in pattern territory. You embarrassed me in front of everyone, she said, starting the car with more force than necessary. I corrected a false statement about me, calmly, in 4 sentences, and then I asked Tash about wine. If that embarrassed you, it's because the statement wasn't true, and you knew it wasn't true when you said it. I let that sit for a second. Marissa, I need you to actually hear what I'm about to say, not just wait for it to end so you can argue. I'm not going to keep score forever and then ambush you with it. If I tell you something is a problem, I mean it's a problem now, in real time, not banking it for later. I told you the first time. I'm telling you again. This is the second and last warning you're getting. I don't have a third one in me. Not because I don't love you. I do. but because I don't believe in pretending a boundary is real when I've already shown I won't hold it. She didn't answer right away. We drove in silence for a few minutes, street lights sliding across the windshield. And when she finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its earlier sharpness, replaced by something that sounded almost like genuine confusion. Why do you even care this much? It's just talk. Nobody's actually trying to control you. That question told me more than anything else that night. She didn't think the words mattered. She thought I was litigating semantics, that the public reframing was harmless because it was just talk, and that my response was disproportionate to something so small. I understood, in that moment, that we weren't actually disagreeing about facts. We were operating on two entirely different theories of what relationships are made of. I believe relationships are made of small, accurate truths repeated consistently over time. She had started to believe, or had been talked into believing, that relationships were a kind of ongoing negotiation for territory, where the words you said about your partner in public were just moves in a larger game, not statements anyone needed to mean. It matters, I said, because words construct reality for the people listening to them, and they construct expectations for you too. Every time you tell a room, I don't make decisions, you're rehearsing a version of me that doesn't exist, and you're rehearsing a version of yourself that has to manage a passive man. Neither of those people exist. I'm not going to spend the rest of this relationship being edited into a character for an audience I didn't choose. You're so sure I'm going to do it again. I hope you don't, I said honestly. I'm not predicting it because I want it to happen. I'm telling you what happens if it does, because I'd rather you know the terms in advance than discover them by accident. She didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. I didn't either. Silence in that car wasn't hostility. It was just two people who'd run out of new things to say about the same unresolved fact. I want to explain something about how I make decisions, because I think it matters to understanding what happened next. I don't decide things in the moment they happen. I decide things in the quiet after, when adrenaline's gone and I can actually think clearly. The kitchen conversation, the dinner party correction, the conversation in the car, those were all data collection, all boundary setting, but none of them were the decision. The decision came later, alone, usually while doing something mundane, because that's when my mind does its best work. Unburdened, methodical, honest. I decided, somewhere around 2 a.m. that night, lying awake next to her while she slept, that I had exactly one threshold left, and that I already knew, with uncomfortable clarity, that she was probably going to cross it. Not because she was malicious. I want to be fair to her. Even now, I don't think Marissa woke up one day and decided to dismantle something good out of cruelty. I think she got convinced, by people who were profiting socially from her transformation, that the piece we'd built was actually a cage, and that breaking it down was an act of self-rescue rather than self-sabotage. I think she believed, genuinely, that testing me was a form of liberation rather than a form of erosion. But belief doesn't change consequence. A person can sincerely believe gravity doesn't apply to them and still fall. So I made a decision that night, quietly, without telling her, the way I make all my real decisions. If it happened a third time, I would not warn her again. I would not explain myself a third time. I would simply begin the process of leaving calmly, fairly, and completely, because a boundary you keep re-explaining isn't a boundary. It's a suggestion, and I have never been a man who deals in suggestions when it comes to my own dignity. I didn't tell her this. There's a difference between giving someone clear information and giving someone a script for how to avoid consequences while still doing what they want. I'd already told her what would happen. Repeating it a third time wouldn't have added clarity. It would have just confirmed, again, that my warnings were renewable. The third time came at her cousin's engagement dinner, 6 weeks later, and it came in a way I hadn't fully anticipated, which I respect in retrospect, as a kind of escalation I should have predicted given the trajectory. It wasn't a single comment this time. It was a performance, sustained across nearly 2 hours, clearly something she and Breyer had discussed beforehand, because Breyer kept glancing at Marissa with the specific satisfaction of someone watching a student execute a lesson plan. It started small, Marissa answering a question that was directed at me, cutting in before I could speak, smiling at the table like she was doing something charmingly assertive. Then it escalated to her correcting things I hadn't said, putting words in my mouth, and then disagreeing with the words she'd invented in front of her entire extended family. People I genuinely liked, people who looked between us with the particular discomfort of witnesses to something they didn't understand but could tell wasn't right. Her aunt asked when we were planning to get engaged ourselves, a normal question at an engagement dinner, and instead of letting me answer or answering with me, Marissa said, "We don't really do the traditional thing. I make the real decisions in this relationship. He's just easy to manage." Easy to manage. I sat there for a second, and I want to be precise about what happened in that second, because it's the part that matters most. I did not feel anger rise in me the way anger usually rises in people. Hot, fast, demanding release. What I felt instead was a kind of settling, a click like the final piece of a mechanism falling into place. The decision had already been made weeks earlier, at 2 a.m., lying awake. This moment wasn't a decision point. It was a confirmation point. The data had completed its pattern. 3 instances, evenly spaced, escalating in publicness and explicitness, the third one delivered in front of family with language specifically designed to diminish me. Easy to manage, not by accident, not as a joke that landed wrong, but as a deliberate performance for an audience that mattered to her more than I apparently did. I didn't correct her at the table. That surprised people who knew me, I think, because they expected the same calm correction I'd given at Tasha's dinner. But this wasn't the same situation anymore, and I wasn't going to spend my dignity arguing facts with someone who'd already shown me 3 times that facts weren't the actual currency she was trading in. Correcting her in a moment would have suggested there was still a negotiation happening. There wasn't. The negotiation had ended the moment she said those words. "Excuse me a second," I said, mild, unbothered, standing up like I was going to the bathroom. I touched her shoulder lightly on the way past, not affectionately, not coldly, just a neutral physical acknowledgement that I existed and was leaving the table temporarily. I walked outside, into the parking lot, and I called for a ride, and I texted her cousin's mother, the host, a short, polite message thanking her for the evening and explaining that I had a headache and needed to head out, apologizing for the abruptness, wishing the engaged couple well. I did not make a scene. I did not announce anything to the table. I simply removed myself from a room that had already decided I was a prop in someone else's story. My phone buzzed 4 minutes later. "Marissa, where did you go?" I didn't answer right away. I sat in the back of the car, watching the restaurant lights recede, and I thought through the next several steps with the same calm I'd bring to any major decision. Methodical, sequenced, unemotional. Where would I stay that night? What needed to be said, and when? What didn't need to be said at all, because some explanations are just an invitation for someone to argue you out of your own conclusion. I texted back, eventually, for words, "We'll talk tomorrow." She called. I let it ring out, not out of cruelty. I want to be honest that there was no satisfaction in this for me, no triumphant feeling of finally. I felt something closer to grief, early and quiet, the kind that arrives before the loss is even finalized, because some part of me had hoped, against the accumulating evidence, that I wouldn't have to follow through on what I'd promised myself at 2 a.m. But hope isn't a strategy, and I don't make decisions based on what I wish were true. I make them based on what's actually happened. She called 4 more times that night. I didn't pick up. I texted once more, near midnight. "I'm okay. We'll talk tomorrow, properly, in person. I'm not disappearing." I just don't have anything productive to say tonight, and neither do you. That last part wasn't a guess. It was a fact I knew about her, about anyone, really, when emotions are high and a situation has just shifted under someone's feet. Nothing said in that state is calibrated. It's just pressure finding an exit. I went back to the apartment the next morning while she was still asleep, and I made coffee, and I waited for her to wake up because I wasn't going to ambush her with this conversation any more than I'd ambushed her with the warnings. When she came into the kitchen, hair messy, eyes swollen from crying at some point in the night, she looked at me like she was trying to read a verdict off my face before I said anything. "Sit down," I said, not unkindly. I poured her a cup of coffee and set it across from where I was sitting. She sat. "I'm sorry about last night," she said, fast, like she'd rehearsed it in the dark. I don't know why I said that. It just came out. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I let her finish. I didn't interrupt because interrupting would have been its own kind of disrespect, and I wasn't interested in mirroring the behavior that had brought us here. "I believe you didn't plan exactly those words," I said, once she was done. "But I don't believe the sentiment came out of nowhere. You've said 3 different versions of the same thing over the last 2 months, each one in front of more people, each one more explicit than the last. That's not an accident. That's a trend line, and trend lines don't apologize themselves out of existence. So what? You're punishing me for one bad night." "No," I said. "I'm not punishing you for anything. I don't operate on punishment. It's not useful to me, and it's not useful to you either. I'm telling you what I told you twice before, except this time I'm not issuing a third warning, because a boundary that gets restated every time it's crossed isn't a boundary. It's a request, and requests can be denied. I'm not in the business of making requests about how I'm treated. I'm done with this relationship." She stared at me like the words hadn't fully landed, the way people stare at test results they aren't ready to believe. "You can't just, we've built a life. You don't throw that away over a comment at dinner." "I'm not throwing away over a comment," I said. "I'm ending it because of a pattern I named clearly twice in advance, with the explicit statement that a third instance would end us. You crossed that line in front of your entire family, with language designed to make me smaller in a room full of people who matter to you. I'm not going to spend years wondering if the next interparty is the one where you decide to do it again, because your friends have convinced you that my calm is something you need to dominate rather than something you get to lean on. I love the version of us that existed before any of this started. I'm not interested in auditioning for a smaller version of myself to keep that version alive. This is insane. People have fights. People say things they regret. You're acting like I committed some unforgivable. I'm not angry," I said again, because I could see her searching my face for the heat that would let her categorize this as an overreaction, a tantrum, something she could outlast. "That's the part one need you to actually hear, Marissa. I'm not in this conversation to make you feel punished. I'm in it to tell you, clearly one final time, that this is over and to make sure the process of ending it is fair. I'm not going to fight you for things. I'm not going to drag this out. I'm not going to badmouth you to anyone. I just don't want to be in this anymore because I told you exactly what would happen and you decided 3 separate times that the warning didn't apply to you. You're really doing this. Over one comment. Over a pattern that ended with that comment, I said, there's a difference, and I think somewhere underneath all this you know that difference, even if you don't want to admit it right now." She started crying. Not performed crying, not the manipulative kind I might have braced for, but the real kind, the kind that comes when someone's certainty about the world cracks all at once. I felt for her. I want to be honest about that. I didn't feel triumphant, and I didn't feel cold satisfaction in being right. I felt the specific sadness of watching someone realize, too late, that a thing they'd treated as infinitely renewable had actually been finite the whole time. "I didn't think you'd actually leave," she said, voice cracking. I thought. I thought you loved me too much to just leave over something like this. I did love you too much to stay and resent you, I said. That's the part people get backwards. Leaving when something's gone wrong isn't the absence of love. Sometimes it's the only form love has left to take. Once staying would mean dishonesty, pretending I'm fine being recast as someone weak in front of people I respect, pretending the warnings I gave you meant nothing. I'm not going to do that. Not to you and not to myself. The practical parts came next, and I handled them the way I handle everything practical, methodically, fairly, without negotiation theater. I didn't fight her on the furniture we'd bought together. I split it by simple logic. What she'd brought into the relationship went with her, what I'd brought stayed with me, and what we bought jointly, we split by value, not by sentiment, with no haggling over which side got the nicer pieces. I didn't touch the savings account that had been hers before we'd combined finances, even though combining finances had blurred the line somewhat. I went back through old statements, calculated her original contribution plus reasonable growth, and made sure that number was untouched and accessible to her, separate from anything that had accrued from our joint efforts during the relationship. She tried, once in the difficult weeks of actually dividing a life, to renegotiate, not the relationship, but the terms of the split, suggesting we should talk through things that I considered settled. I didn't get pulled into it. I'm not interested in relitigating what's fair, I told her over the phone, calm as ever. I made sure you're leaving with exactly what you brought in, plus your fair share of what we built together. That's not me being generous. That's just accurate. I'm not going to argue about accuracy. You're so calm about all of this, she said, and there was something almost accusatory in it. Like my composure during the breakup was its own kind of evidence against me, proof that I hadn't really loved her, or proof that I was somehow inhuman for not collapsing the way she expected. Doesn't any of this bother you? It bothers me plenty, I said. I don't perform what bothers me for an audience, including you. That's never been how I operate, and honestly, that's part of what we're here because of you and your friends decided that not performing distress meant I didn't feel anything. I feel things fully. I just don't think feelings are improved by broadcasting them, and I definitely don't think a relationship's value gets measured by how loudly someone reacts when it ends. She didn't have a response to that. I don't think she expected one, really. I think by that point in the conversation, she'd stopped trying to win an argument and started simply trying to understand what had happened to her. How something so stable had ended so cleanly, with no leverage point for her to push against, no anger to wait out, no instability to exploit. I'd given her nothing to grab onto, not because I was being strategic, but because there was genuinely nothing left to grab. The decision had been made, calmly, weeks before she even knew it was coming, and decisions made that far in advance don't have loose threads. The last conversation we had, a few weeks after the boxes were packed and the apartment was half empty, was short. She called, not to argue, but with a kind of flat, exhausted honesty that I respected more than almost anything she'd said in the preceding months. Briar thinks I should be glad, she said. She says I dodged something by seeing how controlling you'd get if I pushed back, even a little. I almost laughed, but I didn't because laughing would have been its own kind of cruelty, and I wasn't interested in cruelty as a closing note. What do you think? I asked instead. There was a long pause. I think, she said slowly, that you told me exactly what would happen twice, and I didn't believe you, because I didn't think people who loved you actually left over something like this. I thought love meant you just absorb it, keep absorbing it. That's what I'd seen growing up. People who loved each other stayed, no matter how much one person pushed. I don't think love is supposed to be a capacity for absorption, I said. I think it's supposed to be two people choosing, every day, not to make each other smaller. I told you the rules of that as clearly as I knew how. I'm sorry you didn't believe me, but I'm not sorry I followed through. If I hadn't, The warning would have meant nothing, and you'd have learned that you could keep doing this indefinitely, and one day you'd have looked up and not recognized either of us. I know, she said quietly. I figured that out. Just a little too late. That's the part one can't fix for you, I said, gently, because there was no point in being anything but gentle by then. The fight, if it had ever really been a fight, was long over. I gave you the information in advance. What you did with it was always going to be your decision, not mine. She didn't say anything else for a moment, and then she said, I hope you're doing okay. And I told her I was, and that was the last real conversation we had. No drama at the end. The way there'd been no drama in the middle, just two people closing out something that had once been good, doing the final accounting honestly, walking away from change but clear-eyed, each of us finally holding the same understanding of what had happened, even if we'd arrived at it from very different distances.
Thanks for listening.